Welcome to Breaking Barriers, the powerful story of Vanessa Thompson, a rising attorney whose long-awaited visit to a luxury car dealership turns into a shocking confrontation with prejudice. Refusing to back down, Vanessa takes a bold stand, leading to a high-stakes legal battle that draws national attention and pushes her resilience to the limit. Will her fight for justice create the change she's demanding? Subscribe and turn on notifications to follow Vanessa's journey, and let us know in the comments, what would you do in her shoes? Now let's dive into Breaking Barriers. The afternoon sun bathed downtown in a warm, golden glow, reflecting off the polished windows of the high-rise buildings that surrounded the bustling streets. Dressed in a meticulously tailored navy blue suit, Vanessa Thompson walked briskly along the sidewalk, heels clicking confidently as she weaved through the crowds of downtown shoppers and office workers. At 34, Vanessa was a corporate lawyer with a reputation for excellence, known among her peers for her sharp mind and unyielding commitment to her clients. Today, however, she wasn't stepping into a courtroom. Today was personal. She had spent the past 6 months working tirelessly on a high-profile case that had consumed her nights and weekends. It had been challenging, pushing her patience and resilience to the edge, but she'd done it. Her firm had come out victorious, and the case had made headlines, casting a spotlight on Vanessa's strategic brilliance and earning her respect across the legal community. Now that the case was closed, her firm had given her a well-deserved week off, and she had decided it was time to treat herself. The dealership loomed ahead, a glass-fronted, sprawling showroom with a line of luxury cars on display, each one gleaming under carefully arranged lights that highlighted every curve and polished surface. Vanessa's heart quickened as she approached, excitement bubbling up as she thought of the sleek silver sedan she had admired online. This car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of her success and a tangible reminder of how far she had come. Growing up in a modest neighborhood with parents who worked long hours to make ends meet, Vanessa had understood from a young age the value of hard work. Her family had prioritized education, encouraging her to pursue her dreams despite the challenges she faced along the way. She had been the first in her family to attend college, then law school, and every step of her journey had required grit and perseverance. She had faced countless obstacles, subtle biases, outright dismissals, and an industry that hadn't always welcomed her. But she'd never let it hold her back. Each challenge had only strengthened her resolve, and as she'd risen through the ranks, she had made a name for herself as a fierce, respected attorney who didn't back down. Today felt like the culmination of all that hard work. As she neared the dealership, Vanessa allowed herself a rare moment of pride. She was successful, confident, and finally in a position where she could afford luxuries that once felt out of reach. The anticipation built as she imagined herself behind the wheel, her hands gripping the steering wheel of a car that represented not just financial success, but independence, perseverance, and the realization of dreams. Vanessa reached for the door handle, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers, ready to step into the world she had worked so hard to enter. But just as she was about to push the door open, a voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, ma'am. We're closed," said a deep, firm voice to her left. Startled, Vanessa turned to see a man in a security uniform standing a few feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a graying buzz cut and a stern expression that made it clear he wasn't here to chat. His name tag read Daniel Reynolds, and his crossed arms and unyielding posture sent a clear message. He was a barrier, a gatekeeper to the luxury Vanessa sought to enter. "Closed?" Vanessa repeated, offering a polite but confused smile as she gestured to the open sign still hanging on the glass door. "I thought you were open until 6. It's only 4. Daniel didn't return her smile. Instead, he gave her a quick once-over, his gaze lingering for a beat longer than necessary before he responded, his tone flat. "Closed for the day." Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly, taken aback by the curt response. She glanced through the glass doors, where she could see a couple of sales associates chatting beside the gleaming cars, clearly still on duty. "I just wanted to take a look at a few models," Vanessa explained, keeping her tone calm. "I've been looking forward to seeing the new—" "We're closed," Daniel interrupted, speaking slower, as if to a child who hadn't understood the first time. The look in his eyes was cold, dismissive, and Vanessa felt her smile falter. She recognized that look. It was one she had encountered before, and it was never pleasant. It was the look of someone who had already decided who she was and where she belonged. "Could I speak with the manager then?" she asked, holding on to her composure, her tone professional but firm. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Daniel's face hardened, his jaw tightening as though she'd asked him to do something offensive. "The manager's busy," he replied shortly. "Like I said, we're closed." Vanessa took a deep breath, feeling her patience fray. She had faced situations like this before. The quick glances, the shifts in tone, the assumption that her presence was an inconvenience. The knot in her chest grew tighter, but she held her ground. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "I'll wait." Daniel's posture stiffened further, and he unfolded his arms, taking a step closer, as if to physically bar her entry. "Look, lady," he said, his tone sharp, "we don't have time for this. There's a used car dealership down the road that might be more your style." Vanessa felt the sting of his words, each one hitting like a carefully placed barb. She let them hang in the air, resisting the urge to react too quickly. This was a tactic she had learned over the years. Stay calm, stay composed. But the words stung, seeping into her skin like a slow burn. "That's not why I'm here," she replied, keeping her voice even, though she could feel the frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "I'm interested in the cars you sell here. Luxury cars." Daniel's expression remained cold, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We're closed for your kind," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, his tone dripping with disdain. The knot in Vanessa's chest twisted painfully, and she felt the anger flare. She had faced this before, but each time it cut just as deeply. The entitlement, the blatant assumption that she didn't belong, no matter how far she'd come, no matter what she'd achieved, it always resurfaced, reminding her that there were still barriers, still doors that people like Daniel would keep closed to her if they could. "I see," she said quietly, her voice steady but thick with restrained emotion. "I'll leave, but I will be back." Without another word, Vanessa turned on her heel and walked away, her steps measured and deliberate as she crossed the parking lot back to her car. The click of her heels against the pavement felt sharper, louder, each step echoing the indignation simmering inside her. She reached her car and climbed in, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white as she tried to collect herself. For a long moment, she sat there, her gaze fixed on the dealership, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her like a heavy stone. She had spent years fighting to be respected, to be seen as a professional and an equal. And yet here she was, reduced, dismissed, made to feel like an intruder in a place she had every right to be. In her rearview mirror, Vanessa watched as another customer approached the dealership doors. This time, it was a young woman, dressed in a light sundress, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Vanessa's eyes followed her as she strolled up to the door, pulling the handle without hesitation. Daniel was there in an instant, but his posture had changed. He was smiling now, opening the door for her with an almost deferential nod, stepping aside to let her in as if she were royalty. Vanessa's heart clenched, the knot in her chest tightening as she watched the scene unfold. The contrast was painfully clear. She had been turned away, blocked and dismissed, while this woman had been welcomed, her presence validated without question. It wasn't just the unfairness of it, it was the hypocrisy, the casual unspoken rule that defined who belonged and who didn't. And the anger, the simmering frustration that refused to fade, building and rising, hotter and sharper with every second. Before she knew it, Vanessa had opened her door and stepped out of her car. She wasn't sure what she planned to do, but she couldn't sit in silence. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked back toward the dealership, her gaze fixed on Daniel, who looked up as she approached. The moment he saw her, his smile faded, replaced by the same stony expression he'd worn before. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, her voice slicing through the air, calm but firm. "I thought you said the dealership was closed." The woman he'd let in glanced between Vanessa and Daniel, looking confused but staying silent, clutching her purse as though unsure what to do. Daniel's expression hardened, his posture stiffening once again. "It is," he replied, his tone flat. Vanessa tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "But the lady here, she didn't seem to have any trouble getting inside." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes flashing with irritation as he glanced at the woman beside him, looking for an escape. "She belongs here," he muttered, his voice low. Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. She could feel the weight of his words, the sting of each one sinking in. She could have walked away, could have let it slide, but she knew this wasn't just about her. This was about standing up for her right to be treated as any other customer would be. "And I don't?" she asked, her voice quiet, but laced with a strength she hadn't realized she still had. Daniel's only response was to look away, refusing to meet her gaze. Vanessa felt the weight of his silence settle over her, the unspoken rule he had so clearly enforced. She didn't belong. With one last look at him, Vanessa turned and walked back to her car, her heart pounding as she made a silent promise to herself. She wasn't done. She wouldn't let this go. Vanessa gripped the steering wheel tightly as she sat in her car, parked just beyond the dealership's entrance. Her mind replayed the encounter over and over, each detail fresh and raw. She had experienced subtle slights before, too many to count in her years as a black woman moving through spaces where she was often one of the few. But this had been brazening, a deliberate dismissal from a place she had every right to be. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa loosened her grip on the steering wheel. She couldn't sit there forever, but she also couldn't just walk away without doing anything. Her heart pounded as she considered her next steps, her mind flashing back to all the moments she had encountered similar barriers, each one of them leaving a scar that was hard to forget. Still, part of her wondered if she should let it go. She'd learned over the years to pick her battles, to know when walking away would keep her energy intact. But as she looked at the dealership's glass facade, Vanessa felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had worked too hard, built too much, and sacrificed more than anyone could imagine to allow someone like Daniel Reynolds to make her feel small. This was not a battle she could let slip by. On impulse, Vanessa scrolled through her contacts, finding her best friend and colleague, Melanie Johnson. Melanie was a fellow lawyer, just as ambitious and driven as Vanessa, and one of the few people who truly understood the obstacles she faced. Together they had navigated law school, late-night study sessions, and the constant demand to prove themselves in a field where they were often underestimated. Vanessa pressed call and listened to the phone ring, her heart thumping in her chest. "Hey, V!" Melanie's voice came through, bright and cheerful. "Are you finally taking some time off? I thought you'd be sleeping in today after that case." Vanessa tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "Yeah, that was the plan," she said, a tightness in her voice. She hesitated, then added, "Actually, something happened." The lightness in Melanie's tone disappeared. "What's wrong?" Vanessa recounted the incident in detail, from her initial excitement about the car to the abrupt dismissal she'd received from Daniel at the dealership. She described how he'd looked her over, the coded language he'd used, and his refusal to even let her speak to a manager. By the time she finished, Melanie was silent on the other end of the line. Finally she spoke, her voice tinged with controlled anger. That's infuriating, Vanessa. I can't believe he had the audacity to speak to you like that." "I know," Vanessa said quietly, letting out a long breath. "I thought about letting it go, Mel. I mean, it's not like I haven't dealt with this before. But this time, I don't know. It felt different. It felt like he wanted me to feel like I didn't belong." "And you do belong," Melanie replied firmly. "You've earned every right to be in that dealership. You deserve to walk in there without anyone questioning it. If you don't stand up to this, he'll keep treating other people the same way." Vanessa closed her eyes, feeling the frustration build again. Melanie was right. This wasn't just about one moment of disrespect. It was about standing up for herself and others who had been made to feel like they were lesser. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want this to become a big spectacle, but I also can't let him get away with this." Melanie's voice softened, her tone steady and reassuring. "We'll handle this together, V. You don't have to do it alone. Start by writing down everything you remember. Get it all documented while it's fresh. Once we have that, we'll decide on the next steps. And if you're up for it, we can pursue a formal complaint." A wave of relief washed over Vanessa. Melanie's support was exactly what she needed. "Thank you, Mel. I don't know what I'd do without you." "That's what friends are for," Melanie replied. "I've got your back, V, always." Later that evening, Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she typed, each word carrying the weight of her frustration and resolve. She detailed every part of the encounter with Daniel, the way he'd looked at her, the shift in his tone, the suggestion that she should go to a used car dealership. Each detail sharpened her sense of purpose. She paused, her hands hovering over the keyboard as memories of her journey surfaced. She had faced many moments like this one, some subtle, others more overt, but each one leaving a mark. The thought of backing down crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. This wasn't just about her, it was about challenging a mindset that had gone unchecked for too long. Vanessa looked at the document in front of her, filled with everything she could remember about the incident. Her heart beat faster as she saved the file, feeling the significance of this first step. This wasn't just a complaint, it was a declaration, a refusal to let herself be pushed aside. The next morning, Vanessa and Melanie met at the law firm's conference room, a familiar space filled with the sounds of busy associates and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Melanie had already set up a file labeled Thompson vs. Elite Autos on the table, and Vanessa felt a rush of determination as she took her seat. "We're going to approach this like any other case," Melanie began, sliding the file toward Vanessa. "Step 1 is documenting everything. I know you already started that last night, which is perfect. Step 2 is finding any witnesses or additional evidence that could support your experience." Vanessa nodded, her confidence growing. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Well, anything that can establish a pattern of behavior," Melanie explained. "If we can show that this wasn't an isolated incident, we'll have a stronger case. Testimonials from other customers, social media reviews, even internal policies from the dealership. If Daniel has treated others the same way, we need to find out." Vanessa's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. "I can't be the only one he's done this to. And if the dealership is allowing it, they're as responsible as he is." "Exactly," Melanie replied, her expression serious. "We're going to hold them accountable, Vanessa. No one should have to experience what you did, and we're going to make sure they know that." Vanessa exhaled, feeling a wave of gratitude and focus. She knew she couldn't erase what had happened, but she could prevent it from happening to someone else. As she and Melanie outlined their strategy, she felt her anger transforming into something constructive, something she could use to fuel this fight. Over the following days, Vanessa and Melanie dove into the case with relentless energy. They reached out to past customers and former employees of the dealership, hoping to find others who had experienced similar treatment. Vanessa was surprised by the responses they received. A few individuals came forward, sharing stories that echoed her own, incidents where they had been treated dismissively or discouraged from viewing certain cars. One particular story caught Vanessa's attention. Jonathan Lewis, a former sales associate who had left the dealership a few months prior, contacted Melanie after hearing about the case. Jonathan explained that he had witnessed discriminatory practices firsthand, particularly in how staff were encouraged to prioritize certain clients over others. He described how Daniel had been known to profile customers based on appearance, and that management had looked the other way when he voiced his concerns. Vanessa felt a surge of validation as Melanie recounted Jonathan's story. This was exactly the kind of evidence they needed, proof that her experience was part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated incident. Jonathan agreed to serve as a witness if the case went to court, and Vanessa felt her determination solidify even further. Each new piece of information strengthened her resolve. This fight wasn't just about her, it was about exposing a culture that allowed discrimination to thrive. With every story she heard, Vanessa's sense of purpose grew, and she knew she was on the right path. After compiling the evidence, Vanessa and Melanie prepared to file a formal complaint against the dealership. Vanessa felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as she reviewed the document, her name printed boldly at the top. This was it, the first official step toward holding the dealership accountable. Melanie looked at her, a reassuring smile on her face. "Once we send this, Vanessa, there's no going back." Vanessa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. But she knew she couldn't walk away. This was her chance to make a difference, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. "I'm ready," she said firmly, signing her name with a steady hand. Melanie nodded, her expression proud. "Then let's do this." As they filed the complaint, Vanessa felt a sense of clarity and purpose wash over her. She had taken the first step, and now the path forward was clear. This wasn't just about one incident, it was about challenging a system that allowed people like Daniel to act with impunity. And as she walked out of the conference room, she felt a renewed sense of strength, knowing she was fighting for something greater than herself. As the days passed, Vanessa felt both the weight of the case and the strength it was giving her. The decision to file the formal complaint had set her and Melanie on a challenging but purposeful path. Each day brought new developments and fresh stories from others who had encountered similar dismissive or prejudiced treatment at the dealership. The community's response was growing, and Melanie was more motivated than ever to build a case that would reveal the full extent of the dealership's discriminatory practices. Vanessa and Melanie met with Jonathan Lewis, the former employee who had witnessed the dealership's internal culture of profiling. Sitting across from him in their firm's conference room, Vanessa listened as he recounted the way employees were instructed to prioritize customers who looked a certain way, a practice that subtly but systematically alienated clients of color. "When I tried to talk to the manager about it," Jonathan said, shaking his head, "they told me to follow the protocol and implied that I wasn't a good fit for the team if I couldn't handle it. It was clear they didn't want to hear about discrimination. They just wanted to maintain their image." Vanessa felt a pang of anger as she listened. Jonathan's story was painful, but it was also exactly what they needed to prove that her experience wasn't isolated. The patterns he described lined up perfectly with what she'd encountered with Daniel. Jonathan agreed to testify if they went to court, and as Vanessa shook his hand, she felt the weight of his words settle over her. She wasn't just doing this for herself, she was taking a stand on behalf of everyone who had been dismissed, ignored, or pushed aside by a business that prioritized prejudice over respect. Together, Vanessa and Melanie began combing through the documents Jonathan had managed to save before leaving the dealership. Internal memos, meeting notes, and even a few emails that hinted at the customer profiling he had mentioned. These details, although subtle, painted a picture of a business that operated on unspoken rules designed to keep certain clients out. Melanie, ever the meticulous attorney, pieced together these pieces of evidence with a precision that impressed Vanessa. It was as if they were crafting a blueprint that exposed the dealership's underlying biases. With each new bit of information, Vanessa felt her confidence building. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story shared by others, and one that they could bring to light together. Once they felt confident in their evidence, Vanessa and Melanie sent a letter to the dealership's legal team, outlining their complaint and the supporting documentation they had gathered. The letter demanded action. They wanted the dealership to take accountability, initiate mandatory diversity training, and amend their customer service practices to ensure fair treatment for all clients. A few days later, Vanessa received a response from Ethan Green, the lead attorney representing the dealership. It was a formal email, polite but dismissive, offering a settlement that, while substantial, included no admission of fault and no promise of policy changes. The dealership's message was clear. They wanted the issue to disappear quietly, without any public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Vanessa sat at her desk, reading and rereading Ethan's email. She felt a surge of anger. They were attempting to buy her silence, hoping she'd be satisfied with a financial payout that would allow them to continue their practices unchecked. She forwarded the email to Melanie, adding a note. "We're not backing down. No settlement unless they agree to make real changes." Within minutes, Melanie was on the phone with her. "They're clearly trying to minimize this," she said, her voice sharp. "They don't want to address the core issue, and they think a payoff will make it go away." "I don't want their money," Vanessa replied, her tone steady but firm. "This isn't about compensation. It's about accountability. If they don't agree to change their practices, then we're taking this to court." Melanie's tone softened, a hint of pride in her voice. "That's what I hoped you'd say, Vanessa. We'll send a response making it clear. Either they implement policy changes, or we proceed with legal action." That evening, Vanessa sat in her apartment, feeling both resolved and exhausted. The dealership's refusal to acknowledge her experience for what it was, a direct act of discrimination, only solidified her determination. But she also knew this fight was going to be a long one, filled with resistance from those who'd prefer to keep such issues in the shadows. Melanie crafted a firm response to Ethan, outlining the terms Vanessa was demanding. This time, they left no room for interpretation. If the dealership wouldn't commit to mandatory diversity training, customer policy revisions, and a public apology, Vanessa would see them in court. The following day, Vanessa received Ethan's reply. The dealership was disappointed by her refusal to accept the settlement and made it clear they saw her demands as unnecessary and excessive. Vanessa felt her frustration deepen. This wasn't a negotiation to them. It was an inconvenience they were hoping to brush aside. "They think they can intimidate you," Melanie said, her voice simmering with controlled anger. "But they're underestimating us. This isn't the end." As Vanessa and Melanie escalated the complaint, news of the case began to circulate in the local media. An article appeared in the city's newspaper with the headline, "Attorney Challenges Luxury Dealership Over Alleged Discrimination." The article recounted Vanessa's experience, describing how she had been turned away and treated as though she didn't belong. While the article was factual, the comments it garnered were far from supportive. Some readers praised Vanessa's courage, sharing their own stories of similar experiences in upscale settings, while others questioned her motives, accusing her of seeking attention or exaggerating her encounter. Vanessa knew public opinion could be divisive, but seeing the negative comments felt like a personal blow. Scrolling through the online responses one evening, Vanessa felt her heart sink as she read messages accusing her of playing the victim or trying to profit off a minor incident. Others suggested she should have just accepted the settlement and moved on. Each comment, filled with doubt or blame, felt like a wound reopening, and she couldn't help but question if she'd made a mistake by going public. Sensing her distress, Melanie called her that evening. "Hey, how are you holding up?" she asked gently. Vanessa took a shaky breath. "It's harder than I thought," she admitted. "The way some people are reacting, it's like they don't see what this is really about. They think I'm overreacting or just trying to get something out of it. That's the easy narrative for them," Melanie replied, her voice steady and reassuring. "It's easier for people to doubt the victim than to question their own biases. But you know the truth, and you're not fighting for their approval. You're fighting for accountability." Vanessa nodded, feeling the weight of Melanie's words settle over her. She knew the truth of what she'd experienced, and she knew why she was fighting. The voices of those who doubted her were loud, but they weren't louder than the support she'd received from people who understood her fight. In the days that followed, Vanessa found strength in the messages from people who reached out privately to share their own experiences. Some had faced discrimination in other high-end establishments, while others simply expressed gratitude for her courage in standing up. Each message reminded her that she wasn't alone. There were others who understood the reality of what she was facing, and they were rooting for her. With Melanie's encouragement, Vanessa agreed to an interview with a local journalist who specialized in social justice issues. She met with him in a quiet coffee shop downtown, choosing her words carefully as she described the encounter at the dealership, the response from the dealership's legal team, and her decision to fight for real change rather than settle. "This isn't about money," she emphasized, her voice calm but firm. "It's about making sure people are treated fairly and with respect. No one should feel like they don't belong because of how they look or where they come from." The article that followed painted a clear and powerful picture of Vanessa's fight, highlighting the courage it took to challenge a prominent business and the support she was receiving from her community. When the story went live, it garnered significant attention, reigniting public interest and rallying more support around her cause. The media coverage intensified, and with it, so did the dealership's discomfort. Vanessa could see the impact her stand was having. Activists and advocates for racial justice began voicing their support for her case, some even organizing rallies outside the dealership, demanding accountability. Yet, despite the public support, the dealership's legal team continued to push for a quiet resolution. They reached out to Melanie with a revised settlement offer, increasing the financial amount significantly, but still refusing to commit to policy changes or an admission of wrongdoing. It was a substantial sum, enough to sway most individuals, but Vanessa knew she couldn't accept it. To her, this case was about more than a payout. "They're desperate to avoid this going any further," Melanie observed one afternoon as they reviewed the offer. "But they still don't want to take responsibility. They want it to go away quietly," Vanessa replied, feeling a surge of indignation. "But if they think money alone will make this disappear, they're wrong. This is about making them confront what they've been doing and making sure it stops." Melanie nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we keep pushing. They'll have to face this one way or another." Vanessa felt a renewed sense of purpose as she looked at Melanie, grateful for the steadfast support of her friend and colleague. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she was ready for whatever came next. The day of the trial approached with a gravity that weighed heavily on Vanessa's mind. She spent the weeks leading up to it preparing for every possibility. She and Melanie meticulously reviewed the evidence they'd gathered, piecing together a case that was not only about her specific encounter, but about a broader issue that plagued the dealership. They were prepared to show a pattern of behavior, a culture of profiling that had been both encouraged and ignored. As they went over the case details one final time, Melanie paused, meeting Vanessa's gaze across the conference room table. "You know they're going to come for your credibility," Melanie said quietly. "They'll try to paint you as difficult, maybe even opportunistic. Ethan Green's defense strategy will focus on making you look like the instigator." Vanessa nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "I know. But I also know that I have the truth on my side. I've been preparing for this my whole life." Melanie gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. We're in this together." With a steadying breath, Vanessa went over the witness list one more time. Jonathan Lewis, the former dealership employee, would serve as their key witness, recounting how he had witnessed similar encounters and the company's policy to prioritize certain clients. They had also managed to get testimonials from 2 other customers who had been turned away by Daniel under suspiciously similar circumstances. By the time the trial date arrived, Vanessa felt as ready as she could be. She had rehearsed her testimony until she knew every word by heart, determined to present herself with poise and strength. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was abuzz with reporters, supporters, and onlookers, all eager to witness the case that had gripped the local media. As Vanessa entered the courthouse, she felt a mixture of anxiety and pride. This was her fight, and she was finally standing up for herself and for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa took her seat beside Melanie, facing Ethan Green and the dealership's representatives on the other side. Green, a seasoned attorney known for his sharp, aggressive tactics, barely acknowledged them, his focus on the judge. Judge Caroline Baxter, an experienced and fair judge, presided over the case, her gaze unwavering as she surveyed the room. Melanie opened with a strong, direct statement, outlining Vanessa's experience and emphasizing the importance of holding the dealership accountable for its treatment of clients. "This case is about more than one woman's experience," she said firmly. "It's about a pattern of discriminatory behavior, a system that has allowed people to be treated unfairly simply because of how they look." When it was Green's turn, he delivered a calm but dismissive response. "Your Honor, my client has a long-standing reputation for excellence and professionalism. We believe Ms. Thompson's experience, while regrettable, is an isolated incident that has been misunderstood. We are confident that our policies reflect inclusivity and respect." The words stung, and Vanessa felt a pang of anger, but she remained composed. She knew they would try to minimize what had happened, to paint her as overreacting. But she also knew that her testimony, and the evidence they'd gathered, would speak louder than Green's polished words. Finally, it was Vanessa's turn to take the stand. She approached with her shoulders back, her head held high, and sat down, looking confidently at Judge Baxter. Melanie began with gentle, guiding questions, allowing Vanessa to recount her experience step by step. Vanessa described how she'd been excited to buy the car, how she'd dressed professionally and approached the dealership with nothing but respect. Then she spoke of Daniel's words, his dismissive tone, the coded language he had used, and the way he'd implied she didn't belong. "I had worked my entire life to be in a position to walk into that dealership," Vanessa said, her voice calm but resonant. "I wanted to buy a car to celebrate my hard work, to mark my achievements, and yet I was treated as if I were an intruder, as if my presence there was somehow offensive. No one should ever be made to feel like they don't belong based on their appearance." Judge Baxter listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Vanessa continued, recounting how she had left, feeling humiliated, and how she had decided to take a stand not only for herself, but for others who might have been turned away in silence. When Green took his turn to question her, his tone was slick and calculated, his gaze narrowing as he tried to poke holes in her story. He implied that Vanessa had been confrontational, that she had misinterpreted Daniel's words, and that she was exaggerating for attention. But Vanessa held her ground, answering each question with clarity and composure. She could feel the pressure building, but her years of experience as an attorney helped her maintain her cool. She met each of Green's attempts with steady resolve, refusing to be rattled. "Mr. Green," she said, her tone calm but firm, "I didn't misinterpret anything. I know what it's like to be treated with respect, and what it's like to be dismissed." This was the latter. Following Vanessa's testimony, the courtroom became the epicenter of public attention. News outlets ran stories on the trial's opening arguments, and Vanessa's testimony quickly gained traction online. Clips of her words, especially her assertion that no one should ever be made to feel like they don't belong, circulated widely, sparking conversations about discrimination and profiling in high-end establishments. Support poured in from across the country, with people sharing their own stories of prejudice and bias. Vanessa found herself at the heart of a movement she hadn't anticipated. And although the attention was intense, it also gave her strength. People saw her stand, understood the courage it took, and rallied around her. But not all the responses were supportive. Some questioned her motives, suggesting she was seeking fame or trying to make money off a small incident. Others dismissed her experience, claiming she should have let it go. The criticism was harsh, and at times Vanessa struggled to keep her confidence in the face of it. But Melanie reminded her of the bigger picture, urging her to focus on the supporters who truly understood what she was fighting for. "You've given people a voice, Vanessa," Melanie said one evening as they prepped for the next day in court. "Don't let the doubters take that from you. Your story matters." The words settled over Vanessa, reassuring her. She was reminded of all the people who had shared their stories with her, people who had faced similar slights and had stayed silent, not wanting to cause trouble. This was their fight too, and Vanessa knew she was standing for something larger than herself. The last day of the trial arrived with a tension that filled the courtroom. Both sides were prepared, knowing this was the moment to make their final points. Melanie began with a compelling closing argument, pulling together the evidence they'd presented. Jonathan's testimony about the dealership's profiling practices, the stories of other clients who had faced discrimination, and Vanessa's own experience. She argued that this wasn't just about one incident, it was about a systemic issue, a culture of exclusion that had to be addressed. Today, we have the opportunity to stand up to practices that marginalize and exclude, Melanie said, her voice steady and firm. This is about ensuring that businesses operate with respect, that every person who walks through their doors is treated with the dignity they deserve. Ms. Thompson's experience is one of many, and if we allow this behavior to go unchecked, we are complicit in its continuation. When Ethan Green took his turn, he focused on downplaying the evidence, framing it as isolated misunderstandings and unfortunate coincidences. He suggested that Vanessa was overly sensitive, that her interpretation of events was exaggerated. Judge Baxter listened without expression, her gaze shifting between Green and Melanie. When the arguments concluded, she announced that she would deliver her verdict in a week. As Vanessa and Melanie left the courtroom, Vanessa felt a mix of relief and anticipation. They had done everything they could, presented every piece of evidence, and fought with all they had. Now it was up to the judge. The days leading up to the verdict were filled with both anxiety and hope. Vanessa stayed busy, trying to focus on her work, but the case lingered in her mind. Support continued to pour in, and although she was grateful, the wait was difficult. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Vanessa entered the courthouse, Melanie by her side, and took her seat, her heart pounding. The courtroom was silent as Judge Baxter took her place, her expression serious as she prepared to deliver her decision. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, Judge Baxter began, "It is clear that this case reflects more than a single incident. The evidence shows a troubling pattern of exclusionary practices that undermine the principles of fairness and equality." Vanessa held her breath as the judge continued, detailing her findings. At last, Judge Baxter delivered her ruling. The dealership was found liable for discriminatory practices. She ordered them to implement mandatory diversity training, issue a public apology, and pay compensatory damages. A sense of relief and triumph washed over Vanessa as the judge's words sank in. They had won. The dealership was being held accountable, forced to confront their practices and make changes. Judge Baxter's final words resonated deeply. This ruling serves as a reminder that businesses must treat every client with respect, regardless of appearance or background. Discrimination has no place in our society, and today, justice has been served. Vanessa exhaled, feeling the weight of the fight lift from her shoulders. She had stood up for herself and won. The courtroom's energy lingered in Vanessa's mind as she walked out, her steps feeling lighter than they had in months. She'd done it. They'd won. She glanced over at Melanie, who was beaming with pride, and felt a surge of gratitude. This had been a team effort, a battle they had fought side by side. And Vanessa knew she could not have done it without her friends' unwavering support. The victory spread rapidly across news outlets, with headlines reading, "Attorney wins, landmark discrimination case against luxury dealership," and "Justice for all, high-profile discrimination, lawsuit sparks change." The verdict had set a precedent, drawing national attention and prompting discussions about discriminatory practices in upscale establishments across the country. As Vanessa read through the flood of messages from people celebrating her win, she felt both overwhelmed and humbled. Many shared their own experiences of discrimination, expressing gratitude for her courage to speak out. It was in these moments that Vanessa understood the full scope of her actions. She had inspired others, giving a voice to those who had been silenced or ignored. However, Vanessa was keenly aware that the victory went beyond one ruling. The dealership was now required to implement mandatory diversity training for its employees, and they were forced to issue a public apology. These steps, though significant, were just the beginning of the changes Vanessa wanted to see. With a renewed sense of purpose, Vanessa reached out to local advocacy groups, joining forces to create educational resources for businesses on the importance of fair and respectful treatment of all customers. The aim was to ensure that the principles of equality and respect she had fought for would continue to gain momentum. To honor the victory and everyone who had stood by her side, Vanessa organized a small gathering at a popular downtown restaurant. She invited close friends, family, colleagues, and others who had offered their support throughout the trial. The event was a lively celebration, filled with laughter, relief, and gratitude, each moment reflecting the journey they had all taken together. As Vanessa mingled with her guests, she found herself surrounded by words of encouragement and admiration. Her parents, who had always believed in her potential, expressed their pride, recounting memories of her childhood dreams and the dedication that had led her here. Her father raised a glass, his voice filled with emotion as he spoke. "We always knew our Vanessa had something special," he said, his gaze warm as he looked at his daughter. "Today, she proved what we've always known, that she has the strength to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." The crowd toasted, and Vanessa felt her heart swell. She realized that her victory was not hers alone. It was a testament to the resilience and faith of everyone who had been part of her journey. Melanie pulled her aside as the evening wore on, a grin lighting up her face. "This is only the beginning, you know," Melanie said, her tone playful but sincere. "You've got a whole movement behind you now." Vanessa laughed, but she knew there was truth in her friend's words. This experience had sparked something in her, an understanding of how powerful one person's voice could be when backed by the courage to pursue justice. By the end of the night, Vanessa felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was surrounded by love and support, her heart warmed by the presence of those who mattered most. She left the celebration with a new resolve, to continue advocating for change, not just as an attorney but as a leader for others who faced discrimination. As Vanessa returned to her routine, she found herself reflecting on the broader implications of her fight. She had witnessed firsthand the impact of advocacy and recognized the need for a platform that would empower others to seek justice in their own lives. After discussing her ideas with Melanie and other allies, Vanessa took a bold step and founded the Justice Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting individuals facing discrimination in businesses, public spaces, and workplaces. The Justice Initiative quickly gained traction, fueled by public interest in her case and the widespread support for her message. The organization offered legal resources, educational workshops, and outreach programs aimed at helping people understand their rights and hold businesses accountable. Vanessa wanted the initiative to be a place where people could find not only support, but also the tools to stand up for themselves and others. She also launched a mentorship program, working with law students interested in civil rights and social justice. These young advocates reminded her of herself, determined, idealistic, and eager to make a difference. As she shared her experiences with them, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that she was helping shape the next generation of advocates. One of her mentees, a young woman named Lila Torres, approached her after a workshop with a look of admiration. "Miss Thompson," Lila said shyly, "you've shown me what's possible. I want to make the world a better place like you did." Vanessa smiled, feeling a deep connection with Lila's words. "You will, Lila. Just remember, change doesn't happen overnight. But every step you take, every case you fight, it adds up. Keep believing in that." The Justice Initiative became a trusted resource in the community, and Vanessa was invited to speak at conferences, seminars, and forums across the country. She was approached by advocacy groups, educators, and business leaders, all eager to learn from her experience and implement policies that fostered inclusivity and respect. Through these engagements, Vanessa saw the impact of her journey reach far beyond her own story. Several years after her courtroom victory, Vanessa stood in front of a packed audience at a prestigious law school, where she had been invited to deliver the keynote address at a social justice symposium. The room was filled with students, professors, and advocates, each one eager to hear her speak. As Vanessa looked out at the audience, she felt a surge of gratitude and purpose. She had come a long way from that day at the dealership, and her journey had taken her down a path she hadn't anticipated, but one that felt profoundly right. She had grown from an individual seeking justice into a leader inspiring others to pursue equality and fairness. She began her speech with a reflection on her experience. Years ago, I stood up to a business that had told me, in no uncertain terms, that I didn't belong. But what I discovered along the way was that this wasn't just about one person or one place. It was about challenging a culture that allows people to be treated as less than. And each of us here has the power to challenge that culture, to make spaces fair and open to all. Vanessa saw students nodding, their expressions a mix of respect and understanding. She continued, sharing the lessons she'd learned about courage, perseverance, and the importance of community. She spoke about the Justice Initiative, the stories of people it had helped, and the ways they were continuing to push for change. As her speech concluded, the room erupted in applause, and Vanessa felt a wave of fulfillment wash over her. This was the legacy she had worked so hard to build, a legacy of strength, advocacy, and resilience. She left the stage knowing that her journey had inspired a new generation, that the barriers she had broken had paved the way for others to walk through. After the event, a young law student approached Vanessa, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Ms. Thompson," he began, "your story inspired me to pursue civil rights law. I want to help others the way you did." Vanessa's heart warmed as she smiled at him. "Then you're already on the right path," she said encouragingly. "It won't always be easy, but remember, the pursuit of justice is worth every challenge. Stay true to your purpose, and you'll make a difference." As she left the venue, Vanessa felt a renewed sense of peace. She had transformed her experience into something meaningful, using her victory to uplift others and create lasting change. Her fight had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that standing up for oneself could ignite a movement that transcended boundaries. Outside, the city lights glittered, casting a soft glow over the bustling streets. Vanessa took one last look at the venue, the sounds of applause still echoing in her mind. She had started this journey seeking respect, and in the end, she had gained far more: a legacy, a community, and the knowledge that she had made the world a little more just. With a satisfied smile, Vanessa walked into the night, knowing that the path she had forged would inspire others for years to come. If you enjoyed Vanessa's journey in breaking barriers and want to hear more inspiring stories about resilience, justice, and standing up for what's right, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more empowering content to light, and we can't wait to share more stories like Vanessa's with you. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story has the power to make a difference.